Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechtas Bava Metzia daf Nun Vav. We're going to begin on Nun Vav Amud Aleph, about 8 lines from the top. Mesif Ravina. So Ravina is going to ask a question based on what we've been learning up until now, and let's just begin and we'll understand the question. A person who decides to bake bread is a nachtaim, and then he sells this bread to someone else. Now, this baker is an am haaretz. Now, because he's an am haaretz, we have concerns that there's a chance that maybe he didn't separate all the different meiser. So the din is meiser min hachama al tzainenes min atzanenes al chama. If you purchase from, Rashi says, afil min defusim harbe, even if the breads are a little bit different looking, different forms, we say, and therefore the breads don't look like one another, it doesn't make any difference. If you buy hot or cold breads, which means that perhaps some of them were baked at different times, it doesn't make any difference. You are still able to separate them. Afil min defusim harbe again, even if they're different molds. And what's the concern? The concern is that if you're separating meiser, it's possible that some already had meiser separated and some didn't. And therefore the concern potentially could be that if you're buying this bread and it's from different defusim, maybe it's from different people. And if it's from different people, so then all of a sudden you're separating meiser on something which is chiyuv al patur al chiyuv. Look at Rashi. Yesh mehem shemasrin v'yesh mehem she'ein masrin. You could be concerned that some of them were separated and some weren't. V'shem zeh lo iser v'zeh iser. V'hifresh mizeh al zeh mifresh min achiv al patur. You may separate something which has a chiyuv onto something which is patur. V'en shem meiser chalav. It doesn't work. When else in tevel kain, all of a sudden you're giving tevel to a kohen. Umin hapatur al chiyuv. V'en shem meiser chalav. V'nem sashin shikanegdu mesukun. Loy chashinin b'damai. So in this situation, even though we normally would have that concern, we're not for sure that this Amartz, he may have taken off the meiser himself anyway. So it's only din d'Rabbanan of Damai. And therefore, because of this, we're not so strict. Which means that when it comes to din d'Rabbanan, we're not asu chizik kishel Torah, which is a little bit difficult, as we saw before, because apparently, according to the sheet of Rameir, he does hold that when it comes to dine d'Rabbanan, asu chizik kishel Torah, that we do make stringencies. For example, when it came to Gittin, just by not saying b'fanei nechtam, all of a sudden teitzev havalad mamzer according to him, even though mi'ikar hadin was a get, because he holds that asu chachamim chizik l'midavreim yois kashel Torah. So therefore, that's going to be the question. Now, bishlu miminat soinenes al chama, I can understand from cold to hot. Why is that allowed? Could Rabbi Eloi, Diam Rabbi Eloi, Menela Terminal Ral Yafesh Trumasa Truma Shnemar Voloi Sisul of Chait Baharim Chemes Chelboy Mimenu, that you're not going to have a sin when you separate the fatty parts. So Imenu Kaidish, if you didn't do anything, Nostias Chen Lamo. So what was the sin? Mekan Terminal Ral Yafe Trumasa Truma. So maybe the difference between hot bread and cold bread means higher quality of breads. So therefore, maybe that's just coming to tell you that you can separate good from bad, and that's not a problem, because they're both chayiv. Maybe in that case they were both chayiv. Elafil with the fusim harbe. The fact that it came from different molds probably means it came from maybe many other people. You're not necessarily saying that the baker is the one that made it himself. Possibly it was made by other people before. As Rashi said. So apparently we don't have that concern when it comes to Damai, because it's only din d'Rabbanan. But I thought Rameir is concerned. So Amar Abaye, Rebbe Lezer Shaper Kakashale. Actually, it's a good kasha. Shmuel loy Shaper Kamashani. The Kashale Rebbe Lezer, he asked that Misa Debidi Shemayim. That when it comes to Misa, it's Bidi Shemayim. Let's go straight into Rashi over here. So Rebbe Lezer had a kasha, but he also chizik shaper kashale. So that was a good question. Shmuel the Mishani Hamani Rameir he. So he said, oh, it's like Rameir the Aisirayim min Hamevi get. That's not a good answer. The kasha Rebbe Lezer, but he also chizik betrumas meiser shel demai shehi kalwa. Now when it comes to trumas meisers, we saw the meiser min a meiser of demai shehi kala, because shafil truma vadois enu el b'misa b'di shemayim zar she'achla. Nonetheless, we talked about in the Mishnah, if you have a non-Kohen that ate it, so it said that trumas meiser shel demai is one of the situations, trumas meiser shel demai, that you have to add a chaimish. So it's seemingly it's strict that we're requiring that. So we said, oh, why is that necessary even by demai? It's because it's Rameir, because asu chacham chizik l'devreim kishel Torah. Now, that's according to Rameir, and therefore that's the reason why by Trumas Meiser over there we're strict, but over when Trumas Meiser of demai over there we're strict, but over here we're talking about Trumas. We're also talking about demai, and we're not strict. And Shmuel she'asu chizik l'devreim be'eshes ish. When it comes to the situation of a get, we're talking about a married woman. So that's the problem. So let's go back in the Gemara. He asked a good question. Shmuel was shaper kamashani lay. It wasn't a good answer that he said that teretz is like Rameir by Gittin. The kasha Rebbe Lezer misa b'di shemayim. He asked a question regarding zar who eats tevel or truma. Misas Basin when it comes to the din of a married woman. So maybe when it comes to Misas Basin, that's where we're going to be more strict, but not necessarily when it comes to, as we say, Dil Mashani Misas Basin the Chamira. Maybe we're going to be more strict when it comes to Misas Basin. That's why Rameir is strict when it comes to Gittin, but maybe not when it comes to the Mai. Rav Sheshis lo shaper kamaisav law. Sheshis was actually not a good question. The Kamri inhu misa moisef Rav Sheshis lav dechsev says l'sucha lecha b'sharecha. It says you should not eat it in your gate. L'may de moisef Rav Sheshis Rav Yosef Shaper Kamashani Lo El Ravina Adam moisef menachtaim. Why are you asking a question about this baker? Messiah mepalter. You can actually use a proof. You're asking a question against him by a nachtom. You can actually use the case of a palter, in which will be more lenient by a middleman. Did not. Halakech min a palter. If you purchase breads from a middleman, which is like a real a retailer, meiser min kol defus or defus to Rameir. Rameir says you should definitely separate in that situation, because we know that when it comes to a retailer, he only buys all of his breads from one person. So there's not going to be a concern of chiyav al p'tur al chiyav. Al ma'yislach ha'meimer palter mitrei tlasa gavra zoven. Nachdam nami mechad gavra hu zoven. A palter from 2 and 3 people buys. However, in nachtaim, a baker, mechad gavra hu zoven. So he only purchased it from one person, so there's no chashash. So basically, what we're saying again is the whole chashash is only by a wholesaler, as some loaves may require and some may not. However, when dealing with a retailer, they only buy all of his bread from one person, and therefore there shouldn't be a chashash. So let me say this a little bit differently. So by case of a nachtaim, the reason why he allows it over here is I may have said it differently. When we're dealing with a nachtaim, which is a baker who is a real a retailer, so he only buys it from one person, and therefore even it has defusim harbe, we know it's going to be from the same person, and that's why it's no chash, because it was all either separated or not. So it's going to be chiyav al chiyav or patur al patur. Mashin kin, when we're dealing with a wholesaler, when it comes to a palter, it has to be min kol defus to defus. It has to be not from separate defusim, but it has to be from the same defus. Because there, since he purchases it, a palter, matrei, tlasa, gavrizov, he purchases it from many different people, so therefore that's what the chash is. Okay. So therefore you can't ask a kasha or even bring a raya, because it has nothing to do with this notion of whether a mayor will hold the asu chizik l'divrehim kishel Torah. Over here, it's a totally separate situation. It's the likelihood of separating chiyav al patur, and there's a distinction between, again, a retailer and a wholesaler. Rabbi Omer Shmuel Shaper Kamashani law Shemisa ba'olam. It's still a good answer. We're not going to make a distinction between Misa b'di Shemai and Misa b'di Adam. They're both death. Death is bad either way. So even though it's true, we said, well, it must be like Rameir, because we see Rameir, he holds by Gittin that we're strict by Dini Rabbanon. So too when it comes to Trumas Meiser, that there's a Chiyav of Chaimish as well, even though it's Damai, doesn't make any difference. Because even though one's the Rabbanon, one's the Raisa, or not that case, rather one is Misa b'di Adam, one is Misa b'di Shemayim, the distinction should not exist. So that's another way to explain this. Okay. Let's see if there's a question here. No. Let's continue. So let's see the next Mishnah. El devarim she'en lehem onah. So these are cases in which there is no onah. So we've been saying all up until now that there are situations where a person cannot overcharge, possibly a sixth. We said it was a machlokus. But there's certain things that just there's no din of onah at all. What is that? Havadim v'shtaris v'karkos v'hakdeshos, which we exclude for other things we're going to see in the Mishnah in a second. When it comes to slaves, documents, land, and the dinim of hekdesh, there's no din of onah. When it comes to all these things, there's no element of overcharging. In addition to that, ein lehem tashlumi kefel, if let's say they would be stolen, even though you would have to return the object itself, the karen, but there's no din kefel, v'lo tashlumi arba v'chamisha. And there's no arba v'chamisha, which obviously cannot be referring to avadim and shtar. Well, it can't be referring necessarily to when talking about shchita, but it could be regarding to mechira. So if you would steal and then sell, there's a chiyuv of dal v'hei, but that's exclusive to, as the pasuk says, either shor v'seh, and therefore certainly would be excluding these things as well. As Rashi says, "Enun hegas el b'shor v'seh bolvad." Now, when we mention about the arba shomrim, a shomer chinam, someone who is a non-paid watchman, enu nishba, he will not make a shua, says Rashi, that shul pasha, that wasn't negligent, shul kikasu tayr l'shavalehen. There's no chiyuv shvua, enish boyin al shi on karkais, and all these other things as well. So there's no din on making a shvua on these things. But naisi sachain mishalim, and also if let's say it was stolen and you're a paid watchman, now normally naisi sachar is chayv genim b'aveda. However, he doesn't pay in these situations. Where Shimon says it depends. As we continue to nun vav umid beis, he says, "Kedashim shuchai be'achriyusan." Says Rashi Omer Hariel Lai Oila. If you said it's on me, so if you make a neder and you say it's upon yourself, so therefore because of that, if it gets lost or stolen, then you have a chiyuv to have to replace it. Therefore, yesh lehen ona. Therefore, that type of hektish there is ona because it's considered to be like yours. However, shein chabiach like in the davar, you say zu. So if it gets lost or stolen, that's it because it's only on the animal. Ein lehem ona. Says Rashi. Amar harei olai ona v'hifrisha v'humama. You separate it, it gets a mum. Umachu, you sell it. Yesh mehem ona. The kivan de'im mesa nignava. If it would have been lost or stolen, chabiach you'd have to replace it. Therefore, didehi, it's like yours. V'altonu ishes achiv krinin bei. Therefore, it does fall into the pasuk of es achiv, that it's considered to be causing overcharging of you to your brethren, because you are considered to be an owner of this, because we're dealing with a situation where you'd have to replace it otherwise. So therefore, if you would have sold it in this case, there would be a din of ona. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Afa Meicher Sefer Torah, also someone who sells a Torah, a behema or margolius or jewels, ein lehem ona. The Gemara is going to explain why. Armulo lo amur el es elu. We only were talking about these. All right, the Gemara is going to explain that. Says Gemara. So first, let's look at question 4. Question 4 says as follows: Hifrish olasai b'nafel b'mum ha'im yesh ona b'mechirasa. So the Tanakama apparently say there's no din ona ever. However, so this is how he writes it. Kadashim shein chai b'achriyusan. For example, if you say hari zu, then there's no ona. Kachim shechai b'achriyusan. If you say hari alai, that's a machlokas tanoim, as we just saw in the Mishnah. Okay, let's continue. So the Gemara says as follows: Mina hanimili. So how do we know that we exclude these things? Karka, shtar, eved, hekdesh. So the Tanarabban, the pasuk says, "V'chim simchar memcha misecha o kanam yad mitecha." So davar hanikna miyad liyad. So these are things that are transferable items, namely, usually what's referred to as metaltalin. Yatzu karkais, excluding land, shein metaltalin. Yatzu avadim shehuksho karkos. In many places, we make a connection because of the pasuk. We make a hekesh because it's like an achuza, an inheritance, eved to karka, and then yatzu shtaros v'chi simchor mimchor shigufo mocher. You're actually selling something. The thing in itself has an intrinsic value. V'gufo kani yatzu shtaros shein gufo mocher me'in gufo kani. So in itself does not have any intrinsic value, therefore excludes a star. Ve'in oimdin el uriya the whole purpose of a star is just to prove ownership. We actually learn out from here that if a person would sell a document to for the sake of perfume, yeshel hemona. It says Rashi, "Latsur behem avkas simamanim nimsam amacharon shel elu latzarach tashmish gufahu." So this document is actually for the sake of the item itself, and because Rashi says the gufan kani umachor, it's considered to be a sale. So you're actually using it maybe as some type of like a bottle stop. You're using it as part of the perfume itself. So therefore, in that case, you are going to have a din ona because it's directly connected to the perfume itself. So pshita, right? Obviously, it's like metaltalin, if it's like a bottle stop or something along those lines. So lafukim with Rav Kahana the oimer ein ona laprutais. There's no ona when it comes to copper coin. It says Rashi, stam moicher shtaros lavasim. If a person sells shtaros again for the sake of perfume, ein sham hamekach shel iser biyachad ela min ela shel prutos. Kamashmon yeshanola prutos. Okay. Hekdeshos amorkra achiv lo hektish. It has to be someone who is like your brother, something with ownership which is of a hedjit and not of hektish. Maskevul Rabba bar mamel. Kol heichad iksev yadai. Whenever it says in the pasuk the word yado, yadai mamish, who it means his hand. What does that mean? It says Rashi, the diak is miyana mitecha metaltal and davka. It just means specifically metaltal. It's something that can be given over from hand to hand, which therefore that's what we learn out from. Omiyata dechsev yikach haskol artso miyadai, that he took all the land from his hand. So hachinami the whole arabi yadei havi nakin leh. What does it mean? He was holding. I got the whole world in my hands. So like, what does that mean? El mershuso hachinami mershuso just means that he owns it. So therefore, that shouldn't be a correct diak. Okay. So now you're telling me because of that pasuk, whenever it says yado, it doesn't mean literally it's in your hand. Mosanya, the pasuk says im himatze tematze biyadai. It says that if it's found in his hands, ainli el yado, that it's mamish in his hands. However, gagu chatzer v'karfeifo v'nayin talmud learner im himatze tematze mikol makon. Says Rashi. Shim nichnasa sham, if it enters there, and you lock up the door, gunva, and your intention was to steal it, even though you didn't put it into your hands. You'll be chayv kefel as a ganav, even though you didn't physically put it in your hands. Now, Talmud mean matzeh tematzi mikol makom. Tayim because of rachmanim matzeh tematzi. Halav hachi havamina kol hechadenas the cus of yada yada mamashu. It does say yadai, so yado apparently should always mean just it's in your physically in your hand. So we see the yodo does mean hand. Vesu. Furthermore, Tanya we learned v'nasan biyada that was given into her hand. How do we know if not only it was put in her hand the get, but it was put into her rishus? Also, it will be a divorce. Again, yado should mean yad, mamish, hand. So, ela kol yado yado mamashu. What do you mean? You had that one pasuk over there that says vayikach es kol artso. Yeah, but shani hasam is different over there in that pasuk. Delikol mirmahachi ela bershuso. Obviously, we're dealing with land. There's no possibility to say you physically picked up what clods of earth. Obviously, when we're talking about karka and it says the word yado, we have to understand it a little bit more loosely. It doesn't literally mean yado mamish, it means bershusai. Mashin kain other places when it's not talking specifically in the pasuk about land, so therefore it's yado's mamish. So therefore that taka would be a good reason to be able to learn that only when it comes, and it says yadai, so therefore, it's miyad liyad. It's only metaltal when there's a din ona, excluding the other things, including karka. So boy Rabbi Zera. So Zera asked the following question: Schiris yesh lona o ein lona? When it comes to a rental, if you rent a car instead of just buying a car, so buying a car is ona, it's metaltal. How about when it comes to renting it? So Mimchar Rachmana, the pasuk says maybe only regarding to a sale of a little schiris, which comes to exclude rental. Well, Dimol Shtamim doesn't matter. So Rabbi Miksiv Mimchar. L'oil Mimchar Stama. It doesn't say that's Mimchar L'oilam. It doesn't say it's a sale forever. It just means some type of a sale. So it's interesting. A rental is like a sale, but instead of you keeping it forever, you keep it for a small amount of time. And therefore, because of that, it shouldn't make any difference. TB13. Mahatzad she'ein oino schiris. Ma'du be'emes yesh no schiris. Schiris lo machayev ela b'sof hazman v'lo b'tchila. Oz ein ribis. I'm not sure if this is what the answer is. I wrote all about ribis. But the truth is, it just has to do with maybe schiris, because the pasuk says memchar. Okay? So I don't know if this is what I wrote there. Okay, I'm not even going to look at that. But the answer obviously is, the answer is schiris does work. And the reason is because it doesn't say mimchar oilam, mimchar, and a mechira could be even for a one-day rental. Okay. Boy Rava. So Rava asked the following question. Chitin, you have some wheat kernels, v'zarn, and you planted it, bekark in the ground, mahu. What's the din regarding those wheat kernels? What's its status? So what's the problem? Since they're really separated from the ground, you could technically put them in containers, and therefore if you would be selling that, there should be a din of onah if you would sell it. Odilma batlinhu al gav ara. Since it's connected to the ground, there shouldn't be onah. Just say there's no onah on the land. And the question is, it hasn't rooted yet. So the question is, what is the din of this wheat? If you said that throw 6, witnesses come, but he only planted 5, and the arrangement was 6. It doesn't make any difference. Even if normally we say there's no din onah, even if let's say it's less than a sixth, but if let's say I overcharge you instead of $100, $101, so it's less than a sixth. But if I would say I want to sell you 8 pounds and I end up only selling you 7.9 pounds, so the reality is that is an issue. That's a mekach tais. So therefore, in that situation, it wouldn't make any difference. You would, if the arrangement was not in accordance to what was agreed upon, so then certainly there would be like a din of onah, or that the whole mekach would be thrown out. So that came to the question. El di arma ihu shedoiba kideboila. He said, I want you to throw into the ground and plant as much as needed for this land. Vigali milsa deli shadiba kideboila. Turned out the amount that he put was not the right amount. Now, it wasn't a measurement, it wasn't a specific number. But he said, plant the amount that you're supposed to plant for this field. So, is it considered like, again, it's separated? And therefore, Zedino no, Dilma, but Linhu agav ara. And therefore, there's no Odah. So, Nishboinalan, next question. Nishboinalan, no, a Nishboinalan. Would there be a din shvu on this wheat? Command Shan Bekadadamian. Again, Nishboinalan. Is it like separate? Therefore, there's a din shvua. Odilma batlinu agav arv in Nishboinalan, because you don't make a shvu on land, so maybe you don't make a shvu on this either. So it's the same question. Oimer, when it comes to the carbon oimer, in which once the omer is brought on the second day of Pesach, then all the grains that were from before are no longer chadash; they're now yasha, and you can eat them. The question is, oimer matirin or ein oimer matirin? Does the oimer matir these grains or not? So hechadami, the ashrish, if they were already rooted in the ground before tanina, we know that it certainly works. And v'i delo ashrish, if it hasn't happened yet, tanina, we also know. Did none. Im hishrishu kaidam oimer matirin. It was already rooted from before Pesach, so then the oimer will matter, then you can eat it. V'im lav, if it has not yet rooted, asurin ad shiyavoy oimer haba. You have to wait an entire next year. So what's the case? Dichatz dinhu, that the seeds were harvested from before, mizarinhu kaidam oimer, and then they were planted before the oimer. Says Rashi, they were harvested min hachadash, v'yisrichim shiatirim oimer lachila. We needed to be for oimer to matter it, and then you went and planted it. Basically, you replanted it. V'asali oimer v'cholf ilayhu, and then the oimer came again. However, during that time, lo ashrish kaidam oimer, when you reseeded it, it did not root before the omer. So mahu, what's the din? As we continue down now, mahu leminkat lemechel minayu. Are you able to gather them up and eat them now? Command shadim bekadadami v'sharinan avashinu omer. Since they were already rooted, and then you remove them So the fact is, you could have eaten them, but instead you replanted them. Now they're not rooted, but maybe it's considered like they were allowed before. Odilma batlinu agavar teku. The fact that you put it on the ground, now we say that it's considered like it's back on the original ground, and therefore because of that it becomes problematic. Teku, and that's where we'll end. Zarachitim etvu chadasha, yavrlahim oimer kodim sheshrishu. So you planted these wheats, va'avrlahim oimer kodim, and it didn't root yet. Ma'u echmehem oy migidulehem. So hazroyim, as we just said, iboya deloishata. That is a question. We don't know the status of these seeds. Gidulehen, its growths, asurin ad lo'imer haba. However, any of its growths, because it wasn't already from before, these are like new growths, so therefore that certainly you would have to wait until the next year. Question 12. TA 12. Madua hamoicha shtaros ligvos achayiv oy levaisim ein behen ona. So when it comes to a star, we say ein gufo mamli. In itself, it doesn't have intrinsic money. However, if it was connected somehow for the spices themselves, ein ona laprutos, we say ein ona laprutos according to one man de omer adkan.